extermination camp found in Mexico compared to like Auschwitz in Mexico.
And the people who raised their hands that wanted to leave, they would either be killed on the spot or they would laugh at them. And when eventually they got to the camp, those were the people who were sacrificed, who were murdered. So alleged members of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel put out their press release video.
Happening in Mexico is you've had this pain for so many years and it gets blocked out by people and by communities. Boom! Okay, this is a crasher episode about a pretty sad, tragic story. Events occurring in Mexico right now about this extermination camp that was uncovered, a training camp. But a much bigger issue. This gets really deep into the cartel wars in Mexico, the human tragedy that's happened here, how Mexican society is going to react to it or not react to it. A lot of things. So here with Kat Szulc.
Hello. Really sad story.
Yeah. So it's a big story and it's a complicated story. Mm-hmm. So we're going to break this down. So first of all, the basics kind of headline that some of you would have seen, extermination camp found in Mexico compared to like Auschwitz in Mexico. Yeah. And it was this big ranch in Jalisco state in Teotihuacan, this town in Jalisco state. And this big ranch found, and it was entered by these what are called Buscadores, searchers, which is another very sad name in itself in Mexico. Mostly women, mothers of disappeared sons, also fathers, brothers, daughters,
any family
members who are looking for their disappeared loved ones. And because of the failure of the government to find them, they take this upon themselves. They get information, and they went into this ranch and they found hundreds of pairs of shoes, which created this very iconic image of these hundreds of pairs of shoes, like empty shoes, like where are the people?
Like looks like the clothing items at Auschwitz.
It looks like clothing items at Auschwitz. And these, what we'll describe first of all, and we'll get into details about this, we'll describe first of all as being crematorium ovens for burning bodies. Now this gets into quite a debated point about this. We'll get into that, but this is how the story was broken. And also all kinds of items, and then finding what appeared to be bones, human remains in this camp, as well as
notes,
and a training facility for cartel hitmen. And at the same time, this coming out of being various testimonies of people who had been kidnapped by the cartel and forced to be hitmen. So this is how the story broke, and then it became this big issue in Mexico, which is ongoing.
And keeping in mind, it's only 58 kilometers from Guadalajara, very close to the capital city.
So it's Mexico's second city, like right close there, in the area of tequila. And this gets into this dualism you see in Mexico, where you have this amazing country and these great cities and beaches and pyramids and culture and people, and then this horrific violence happening at the same
right next door in the backyard,
happening at the same time. And as the news broke, there was talk, there was stories coming out of more than 1,000 victims at this ranch. Now we'll start breaking this down, all of this going through, but that's the kind of breaking kind of news. How was it when you first broke the story? You have a lot of emotional reaction personally, and how was the reaction to people you were telling this, when you were bringing this story out on the media?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because you've obviously been covering this longer than me. So you've seen these sort of camps, these sort of death places having been discovered for years. But this one was very significant because of the amount of personal items that were found, the handwritten notes to family members. I think that was the most striking to you, or to me, like when I read Mama, don't look for me anymore. Ya no me busques más. Estoy con Dios. I'm with God. Things like that. I mean, what the fuck? These people were going there knowing that they were going to die. Or perhaps once they got there, they knew this is not a place where I should be. And then the dress shoes, right? You see a lot of people who were under the impression that they were going to official job interviews and put on, their Sunday best. And those are the pairs of shoes that were being found. I mean, I would love to hear what you think. Do you think those were people that were going ready to become sicarios, or do you really think, they come on?
Yeah, I think that was the case. I think you said there was an emotional connection to people in Mexico to this, with the notes, and one of them, very heartbreaking one, was someone like writing to his like wife, his girlfriend, saying like, "Mi amor, I love you.
Yeah.
Don't remember me for being like moody and jealous.
Yeah.
Remember me for like I love you.
I loved you the whole time."
Yeah, and that kind of stuff, which does just bring tears to your eyes. But also, this is what's happening in Mexico is you've had this pain for so many years, and it gets blocked out by people and by communities.
Of course.
And this idea of not reacting, and then suddenly you get responses. Now, I actually think this sometimes the stars line up. So what you've had is quite a big response among people across Mexico.
Internationally,
but particularly in Mexico, but also people who don't normally comment about this, like case of YouTubers suddenly commenting about this, and these demonstrations of people putting shoes in plazas, in zócalos about this. So getting down then to some of the history first of all, before getting deep into the story. So we have Mexico's cartel wars. I mean, there's not really strict dates about this, but a lot of people date from like 2006 onwards.
Yep.
When Felipe Calderón launches a military crackdown on cartels, which were already rising up then. Mm-hmm. But that's when you see it 2006 onwards. I've been covering this since then. I was there in day one when they were sending the military to Michoacán and running around with the military right there. So I've covered this all the way through these years. Now, actually, some of the kind of hyper-violence started happening. It was already happening in 2006, like beheadings.
For sure. And the bodies hanging from the bridges.
Hang from bridges.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about, so you can see, this all links up to this because it's an escalation of violence.
For sure.
So the first actual beheadings were still in 2006. I believe there's a debate about where they came from. I believe influenced by even Al-Qaeda videos.
For sure.
Of those days shown. And there was first 2 beheadings in September 2006. There was 5 heads dumped in a disco dance floor in Michoacán, in Uruapan, Michoacán, the Sol y Sombra nightclub. I was working at the Associated Press news agency at the time when this video came through from a stringer with these 5 heads sitting on a dance floor.
And it was so striking because we had never seen that before. No one had ever seen that before.
Has never before. And a note saying, "This is holy justice."
Yeah.
And it was like, what the hell?
And that was like one of the first narcomantas, right?
Yeah, one of the first things. So it was new. In fact, we didn't put it out on the AP wire. Mm-hmm. At the time, one Japanese TV station was like really interested and like, we really want that video.
Interesting.
So you start seeing this public displays of violence. But the mass graves really didn't come out until, then we saw this story of El Pozolero, mm-hmm. which is again kind of connected to this in Tijuana. The stew maker who was some old kind of guy, and he was like, "Yeah, I've been dissolving hundreds of bodies for the cartel." And then around 2010, we start to get big mass graves discovered and big massacres happening. So we start to see them, and then through 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Now, from those times, some of the biggest incidents, which again, compared to what's happening in the ranch, but for some reason not having the impact in the public.
I think that's because of the desensitization of the Mexican society. Because when those first public displays of violence started happening, they were so extreme, like seeing 5 heads scattered in a public area or the bodies hanging from the bridges. At first, it's extremely shocking, but then it gets to a point where it's completely normalized, right? So,
So some of the interesting things about this, to understand a bit about the response of Mexican society to this.
Yep.
So one was I went to a scene where they dumped 49 bodies, all decapitated, all their hands and their feet cut off.
Ridiculous.
Okay, I arrived, I flew up there, I got news, and it was a Sunday morning, got news is happening, flew up there and got there when they came into the morgue in Monterrey. But went to the place it happened in Catarita, which is a town on the outskirts of Monterrey. And we're talking to people about this. What do you think? Just down the road, there was like 49 bodies dumped. People are like, nothing to do with us. You seen the football? And it was like a football semi-final.
Yeah.
Coming up, Santos, Monterrey. And it was like, okay, this was a feeling of it's like when you have trauma as an individual, and a lot of us in life had some kind of trauma. I remember when I had trauma as a teenager, certain trauma as a teenager, and people would ask me about these things happening in my house, whatever. I don't know how to play it. I had a schizophrenic sister. It was kind of in a weird situation. My sister was having a breakdown in her house, and people would ask me, what's happened? I heard your sister's having a breakdown. I saw her in the street, and I'd be like, I don't want to talk about it.
Block it out.
Block it out.
Yeah.
And you feel like Mexican society doing that thing as well.
They do the same thing. And also, it makes a huge difference when it's collective.
Yeah.
Like even for me, big trauma when my mother died. But my father, my brother, and I, we blocked it out as a whole.
Yeah.
So then no one's dealing with it, which it makes it a lot easier for you as an individual to compartmentalize it and put it away. So imagine in a country when this is all happening and everyone all together collectively is blocking it out, we're going to focus on the football final. Yeah.
Another story which reflects as well how the Mexican society has reacted to this. And another important thing in the development, and I have a piece on the crash out where I've listed all of these big mass graves and massacres over the last decade and a half leading up to this. But one very big one was San Fernando, Tamaulipas. It was actually the site of two big events. A massacre of 72 migrants by the Zetas, or allegedly by the Zetas, and a mass grave with about 193 bodies, which actually has some of the features, and we'll get into later what was discovered at the ranch, but some of the features of Teuchitlan, including supposedly people forced to fight as gladiators and horrific stuff.
To the death, yeah.
So I went to San Fernando a couple of years after some of these big graves were discovered. Went to the sites of these big things, there should be monuments there. But I went there and went to the mayor's office. And the first thing they did was they played a video of that they'd got the Guinness Book of Record for the largest ceviche.
Oh my God.
And this is tragic, but it's makes almost like it's kind of laughable that because San Fernando at the time was you heard that, you thought of the massacres. Mm-hmm. So they were trying to take away that and it had a video.
Shift the narrative.
People moving all these containers of ceviche, and it was a ton ceviche, but just the way that the society is just trying to block this out and change this. Now, so another big massacre to talk about, or two more to talk about before we get to Teuchitlan, is Allende, Coahuila. So that was, and I went to that site. That was these metal barrels which were used to dissolve bodies, the Zetas, and it was as many as 400 people disappeared. And what was creepy there, I went to this ranch, and you had these metal barrels, and you had plastic containers of battery acid and all these things they used to mix up to dissolve these bodies.
Yeah.
And then so again, there was a horrific massacre, and again, it didn't really create the kind of social reaction. Now, 2014, it was discovered in 2014 that it happened a couple of years earlier. People didn't even know about it. Our great friend and colleague who works for Crash Out as well, Juan Alberto Cedillo, was the guy who discovered the massacre in Coahuila, Allende, Coahuila. You had then 2014 the disappearance of the 43 students of Ayotzinapa school, which did create an international reaction.
Yes.
For different,
to this day.
To this day, it still has. And that was, again, a horrific incident. And then you also had a mass grave discovered in Veracruz, which is 298 bodies in this one area on the outskirts of the city of Veracruz, by the coast. The creepy thing about that, I've been down to that site, and it's like cow fields next to a housing area. When they were digging up these bodies, there was this like smell of human, human remains, and you on the back, it's backing onto like family houses, and like kiddies' bikes, basketball hoops, and the family were like, you're creating this smell. We're complaining. You're creating this smell coming up to us. That was again mothers who discovered that, and it was discovered. Mothers were marching, looking for their sons. And they were on a day marching, and a guy rolls up in a car, and he comes up and goes, check here, and
tips them off,
and gives them a little map with it drawn and with this place.
Hand-drawn map,
and that's how they found it. They eventually go in it, and then that one was discovered up to this point 298 different remains. So it's kind of it's insane again. This level of death, and all over Mexico, you've got these kind of clandestine graves.
Yeah.
So it's a big issue happening, and then we get to this in Jalisco. So they first go in there March 5th.
Well, first National Guard was there in September.
Yeah.
And they arrested a few cartel guys. Saved some kidnapping victims, and left. And then the Guerreros Buscadores de Jalisco go in March. Apparently, the Rancho Izaguirre, and it has, it's like very typical Mexican ranch. You've got the two horses on the front doors, and then the name of the ranch, and they just walk in. National Guard was there, but nothing is taped off. It's not being treated as a crime scene or an investigation. And again, just like those searching mothers in Veracruz, they were tipped off by someone, or...
Go back a second, it was even worse than they went in there and left. So you had an incident on September 20th.
Yes.
So there was, I think that incident you had National Guard, which is basically part of the Mexican military and domestic policing. And they heard some shooting or saw guns, went into this place, arrested a bunch of cartel guys, found a dead body, found a couple of people tied up. And then supposedly it was then secured by the Jalisco state, what they call in Spanish, Fiscalia, which is a bit of a mix between investigating detectives and prosecutors.
Yes.
Now, they supposedly secured the ranch, but then
But what does that mean? What does securing that ranch mean if these collective groups looking for missing people go in and find all these personal belongings and the 3 clandestine ovens?
So then it was supposed good, but these people get a tip off, and they go in there on March 5th. And so what do they find when they go in there on March 5th?
They find 400 pairs of shoes, multiple backpacks, which has also become, a sort of contentious topic because some of the backpacks are tied to the presidential election campaign. And then you find personal notes, handwritten notes from people who were at some point at this camp, at this ranch, basically writing goodbye letters to their family members. And this is something that I wrote in my Substack piece about this, was what I thought about when I saw that was, of course, first, how tragic, but also were these people at some point led to believe that when you die, or if you fight to the death, or if you sacrifice, you can write your sort of last words or a letter and we'll get it to your family. Because these people who were there knew that they, like the CJNG who run this camp, were basically tracking their every move, knew their family, knew where they lived, which is also used as an incentive to not escape or try to run away, because you try to do that and whether you're successful or not, your whole family could perhaps be murdered. And I'm wondering if, okay, well, they thought maybe, I can write this final note to my wife, and they told me that, if I sacrifice myself, if I fight to the death, I'm a good sicario, then they'll get it to her, which is so tragic.
Yeah. So just go back a second.
Sorry.
No, that's cool. Just go back a second, because this is part of this issue. Every part of this story now is being contested.
Yes.
And fought over. So even like the number of pair of shoes. So like someone said it was 400 pairs of shoes.
Someone said 1,000 something.
Someone said it was 200 pairs of shoes, which is like 400.
Right.
And whatever. Either way, there was a lot of shoes there. So they found these things and now...
And clothing, jewelry.
Now, yeah, all the clothing and jewelry. Now, one thing they also found is these others. We'll get in this... Leave that for a second.
Yes.
But as this came out also, so they came out and they were publishing this. They were there several days. They were digging up. Now, they were also... that they were getting testimony from survivors, and the media were getting a lot of testimony from survivors who had been in the camp. Now, what kind of testimony were you seeing coming out that it would go directly to the media, or was being given to the group, the searchers who were called the Guerreros, Buscadores de Jalisco?
A main testimony or a narrative that I've seen across a few people's testimonies, and specifically there's this one individual who's from Jalisco, and his testimony is in a court document. And what it seems like is people were getting messages on WhatsApp or added to WhatsApp group chats or through Facebook groups, which we know in Mexico, Facebook is a really popular platform still. And there's a lot of groups on there, especially looking for work. And these people were told that, hey, do you want to make 5,000 to 8,000 pesos a week working, whether it's picking fruit, some sort of agriculture job, or some sort of like office tourism job in Jalisco? And these people, for a lot of them, of course, this extra money sounds great. Yeah, I want to take this job, even if they were from out of state. And so they would agree to this. A lot of people would get Ubers sent to them. They would get taken to a bus station. That bus station would take them to Jalisco, typically to Puerto Vallarta. In Puerto Vallarta, they would be picked up and held at a house, and their phones would be destroyed. And that moment for a lot of these people is when they realized, fuck, this is not what I signed up for. This is not what I thought it was going to be. And that's when they were made aware that, hey, you're working for the compañía, the CJ&G cartel. And from there, they would be taken to the camp. And some people say in their testimonies that they were asked, when there was a room full of these recruits, quote unquote, do you want to leave now that you know what you're here for? And the people who raised their hands that wanted to leave, they would either be killed on the spot, or they would laugh at them. And when eventually they got to the camp, those were the people who were sacrificed, who were murdered, or who the other people had to kill to kind of show their dedication. Because certainly a major part of this recruitment camp, if they were recruiting people, is to completely dehumanize everyone that's there. Because as a sicario, you have to be basically strung out on drugs and completely dehumanized in order to fucking play soccer with a decapitated head, right? So
like, for people who can't get their heads around this, it's just so crazy. What they're doing is a bit like the child soldiers in Africa.
100%.
Kind of stuff, where you kidnap people and then you say you're going to fight in a war. And I think this is probably a practice which people have been doing in warfare for forever.
Beginning of time, for sure.
Where you kidnap someone, you're going to fight for us, and we're going to brutalize you completely.
Yeah.
Also, these people know where their families are. Now, one word I would say of caution with these testimonies, and
yes.
I certainly do believe a lot of them, but one thing I've definitely got a caution about is you could get rival cartel saying, phone up media, phone up the Buscadores, the searchers, tell them this, to try and make the Jalisco Cartel look bad. Now, the Jalisco Cartel
is bad, objectively,
is bad,
but at the same time,
there is a strategy, very established strategy
course.
among cartels. They call it calentar la plaza, heat up the territory.
Yep.
So it's crazy. So just a little word of anybody who's not familiar with the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. So this is the state of Jalisco. So this is the headquarters, the main territory of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, even though they're an international organization.
And Puerto Vallarta is basically ground zero for the Jalisco.
Yeah, right there, and they're led by this guy El Mencho, but with these various different warlords.
And El Mencho was a police officer.
Was a police officer and heroin trafficker who's the Lord of the Roosters, but also you have, within these cartels, you've got the big boss guy, and then you've got lieutenants and regional operators, but then also you have local operators. And sometimes you can end up with a very bloodthirsty or psychopathic local operator over a particular territory. So when you look into these massacres and try and find out actually how it happened, like the massacre of San Fernando, trying to really break down, okay, who gave the orders to kill 72 migrants? And it ends up being like one plaza boss who's like a real crazy guy, and then he's kind of on the phone and gets an order from a boss who says, the boss, I've got some problem, and then he just says to somebody else, kill him.
Deal with it.
Yeah, and then somebody, he said deal with it. What does that mean? Just kill it. So you have, this is the reality of what is happening with these paramilitary organizations. Now, another thing which really strikes me about some of these testimonies, so there's one testimony, and again, taking real caution, who talked about 1,500 victims there.
Yeah, I saw that.
But also, one of the things, the details which most freaked me out and most stuck with me was saying that they had pigs on this ranch, and that they would, and if people were like, they wanted to kill them, they would just throw them to the pigs. So you're watching this video and you're really into this world of cartels and organized crime and drugs. If you want to find out more about this, then go to www.crashoutmedia.com. For completely free, you can subscribe and see these great reportage, analysis and breaking news. Or if you like this, then for $5, the price of a couple of cups of coffee, you can get full access and become part of the Crash Out community. Now back to the video. Throw them to the pigs, and then people be like, and like during the night, they'd be sitting there and everyone would be like, just totally freaked out, like just like piled up sleeping. And then somebody in the night would be like crying and making noise, and they'd be like, take them out and throw them to the pigs. And people were just like, so it is that kind of, that comparison to kind of people who survived concentration camps. And then somebody's saying, I did horrific shit. And they were saying that they were forced, like someone said, like, you're going to have to kill that guy.
Yeah, go fight each other and see who dies first.
Yeah.
And certainly we have to mention that there is always the possibility that some of the people that were at this camp voluntarily went to be recruited by CJNG. I mean, we see these WhatsApp group chat messages where people were saying, I want to join CJNG and I want to represent Jalisco a la verga and shit like that. But at the same time, there's a lot of evidence that will still point to that forced capture that led to people being there. One thing that stood out to me, you talk about the pigs, but when I saw the personal belongings, and, because those types of belongings, they really humanizes who was there. And it really can show, what kind of people were there. When I saw, like the women's jewelry, like a bracelet watch that was had a pink dial. And then you have, there was a Disney princess backpack. And one of the testimonies talked about how they would bring underage girls to the camp.
Yeah.
And when I first saw the personal belongings of the women, my first thought was, of course, I don't think that those women went there to become sicarias for CJNG, especially the type of belongings that were there. And anytime we talk about cartels, especially because I'm a woman covering this, your mind goes to a very dark place of what would have happened. And then seeing the Disney princess bag, why was that there? Why is there a pink duffel bag with Snow White, Belle, and Cinderella on it? And what happened to that girl that brought that there? And one of the testimonies talks about how they would bring them to rape them there.
I mean, totally. And there's like a lot of this stuff is going to be, we'll get into this, it's going to be basically impossible, I think, to come to a conclusion about the evidence of this camp totally, because it's getting so messed up now, the evidence there.
But there are certain things that are undeniably...
Certain things are undeniable, yeah. But either way, we know that loads of these practices happen in Mexico.
Of course, and we know that CJ&G does this.
And we know, there's women who were kidnapped by different groups, including the Zetas, who survived being sex slaves of the Zetas for years.
Yeah.
We know a lot of this stuff. There's mass graves all over the country. We know there's forced recruitment in cartels. So the forced recruitment as well, they kidnapped some of these people who became sicarios were then thrown particularly into Zacatecas, which the last couple of years has been one of the most intense war zones in Mexico.
Yeah.
Between the Jalisco New Generation Cartel and the Sinaloa Cartel. And they're fighting in Zacatecas, and so you just you're sending, these recruits into these...
Just to go die, basically.
Cannon fodder.
Yeah.
Cannon fodder. But also, it's very messy. It's interesting what you say. Obviously there are lots of people who join cartels voluntarily.
We know this.
See, most people,
whether it's money or for power, to feel you're a part of something, it's part of it.
Most people historically join cartels voluntarily, but there's also been this kind of forced recruitment thing as well.
And the notion of the forced recruitment is insane to me, because it's like what you said. It kind of follows that, African guerrilla agenda of like the rebels, where it's like, we're going to take these vulnerable kids or young people and we saw like the age range of allegedly 21 to 25 years old, or no, even younger, like 18 to 25 years old, of people who were at this camp. I mean, for the most part, and I know a lot of people will disagree with me, an 18-year-old kid who has struggled with money and resources his whole life, what is his mindset to make a decision to go and join organized crime?
So, some other details there. A lot of the witnesses, also the survivors who have been witnesses to the camp, said that they were taken to the bus station, or a couple of bus stations in the Jalisco area.
And taken to Puerto Vallarta, and then from there.
Yeah, including one of the big bus stations there in Tlaquepaque.
Yes.
Yeah, it's one of the big bus stations there. Buses arrive from across the country, so people from different states. Come to that bus station, and it had been already noted as a big place of disappearances. A family member saying, my husband, my son, the last thing he went to this bus station to a meeting and to a job interview, and
we never heard from him again. And it's also important to keep in mind that a lot of like the Uber and taxi drivers that were transporting people from their homes to the bus station were already on the cartel payroll, because they would have to send a picture proving, hey, yeah, we're in action. I've got this person, taking them to the bus station.
And then another thing on the ranch that was found was these kind of obstacle courses type training stuff.
With the tires.
So you have like tires and wire and stuff that they would kind of go under and stuff.
Army crawl through. And
yeah, exactly, with the training. Now, so this came out, big reaction. What's the Mexican government's reaction been to this?
Mexican government's reaction to this is, I think, it's pretty harmful to a lot of the people who are victims of this, or who know people who are victims of this. Because, well, first of all, the governor of Tamaulipas, the director of tourism, I think, for Tamaulipas.
For Jalisco?
No, for Tamaulipas, because right after Jalisco was found, 2 or 3 of these graves were found in Tamaulipas by another missing people's collective. And he went on, did a bunch of interviews and basically said, no, everyone is saying that Jalisco and Tamaulipas, these are these crazy cartel-run like concentration camps, but they're actually just unidentified cremation places. It's not this illicit clandestine thing that you think it is. And we should talk about what the president of Mexico.
Yeah, so sure. So in Tamaulipas, they found these like they found a crematorium or something.
Yeah, and it was getting confused.
Then they were saying that is so okay. So one of the things we had the presidential reaction to this, but then you've also got in Mexico you've got the president and federal level, and you've got the Jalisco state level. Now the Jalisco state level were the ones, and because of the kind of convoluted system, it's like Jalisco state prosecutor's office, Fiscalia, is first of all dealing with the case, then the federal government's going to take it over. But first they want the Jalisco Fiscalia, even though supposedly
they'd already been
there, and there could be a lot amount of corruption. We know there's massive amounts of corruption at many, many levels of people working for the cartels. But they go in there and do a first report and they say, no, not true, no cremation ovens. Now this gets into, so we didn't find any cremation ovens. That was all not true. Now this actually gets in, and the mothers came back and said, well, they weren't like commercial cremation ovens.
They were underground.
They were basically bricks, like holes in the ground with bricks and ash and bones. So they were kind of like, the kind of thing that a cartel would make if it was burning bodies there, rather than bring in the builders and make what a commercial crematorium has. But they use that to throw this off, to say this whole thing's a lie, and a lot of this issue gets politicized very, very fast. So Mexico is very divided politically.
Yes.
And so some people start saying, this is all the fault of the current ruling party, which is Morena.
Yeah.
And they associate completely with Morena. I think it's bigger because it goes way before Morena took power. But then on the other side, on the government side, or the supporters, they start saying, oh, it's all a lie. There were no, it's all invented. It's a fraud. So I'm sure you find yourself. I find every time I'm reporting on this, you're just showing things like shoes in Zocalo and people protesting. You get all these comments saying, you're stirring up, you're making up stuff.
Amarillista.
Yeah, all of this stuff. We're just reporting the fact that people are protesting and putting shoes in the Zocalo.
Yeah, we're not protesting.
Yeah,
just showing it.
And they're just saying, you're making this up. They want to, or they say, all the victims, these are mothers whose kids were like killers and sicarios.
And that happens a lot in Mexico too, where if people feel like the victims were not the perfect victim, immediately it's, people kind of wash their hands of any feeling of sadness or grief for them. We see that happen a lot, right? Like even when you see those mass killings, like recently in Culiacan too, where those bodies are dumped, people are like, well, they knew what they got themselves into. But I think this is where this case becomes very murky, is because we're talking about a lot of the testimonies that it was forced recruitment.
So I think with Mexico, and it's a country I love, that I've spent 24 years of my life here.
My whole life.
I love this country, completely. But also I think it has a problem collectively in trying to deal with these big challenges it's facing. And so you find ways of making excuses. And one thing is saying, well, the victims kind of deserved it. When you have all this violence, well, they were just murders. Initially for a lot of the cartel deaths, the narco deaths, so it's just bad guys being killed. Or there's like rich people who are kidnapped, just rich people. It's just like they're privileged, they're millionaires,
and they'll deal with it.
Yeah, they're people. Or there's students who are kidnapped and disappeared in Ayotzinapa. They were like troublemakers. So one thing is just like re-victimizing the victims, victim blaming.
Yeah.
Which is in a real sense as an excuse to try and confront this. And also, it's a very divided political environment. So a lot of people are like, either this is all the fault of Morena, who the current government,
administration, yeah,
who is in other sense, Claudia Sheinbaum is a popular president.
By a landslide.
She won the election by 2 votes to 1. She's a popular president. At the same time, this violence has been going on, but someone will blame it all on Morena. But other people in the government will say, no, it's not happening. And if it is happening, it's all the fault of Felipe Calderón.
Yes.
Who began the war on drugs or the war on cartels back in 2006. but he's been out of power for like 13 years now. So, it's still this guy's fault. So you have a very divided political environment already, and the government, so the state government trying to say there's nothing there, but the state government, I mean, these guys could also find themselves in prison.
For sure.
About this. And the federal government taking a bit of a kind of like, on one side saying, well, we'll find out, President Claudia Sheinbaum, on one side saying we'll find out, and the others, like, oh, maybe it's the fault of Jalisco government, we can blame it on them. And then in the midst of this, you get this cartel.
You get the third government.
Yeah, okay.
All right?
Yeah.
You get this incredible press conference. So alleged members of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel put out their press release video addressing what they called allegations that they're the ones responsible for this extermination camp. And in this video, a man is talking, and he really starts off by kind of humanizing himself. He says, I'm a father, I'm a husband, we have values. He says, we are organized crime, we're the bad guys, but we're not that bad. We're not going to do this. We're not responsible for that. And sort of shifts the blame onto the collective group looking for missing people and says they have an agenda and the government has an agenda. And basically, I'm paraphrasing, but it says that they're using CJ&G as a scapegoat for this extermination camp. Now, what's interesting about this is kind of, as we've seen, it always plays out like this, right? Where we see this massive atrocity and the government reacts, Mexican society reacts, and then the cartel also reacts. They work as like their own political body, right? And a lot of people, when I posted this video and I quoted some of the lines in English, people were saying, well, Katarina, are they CJ&G or not? Are they responsible or not? Like really taking into consideration what these guys who are saying, they're saying, we are organized crime, we are the cartel, we're not responsible. And people are like, so they're not responsible? Like really taking into consideration what they're saying. And I think it's really important to take it with a grain of salt, because if you have people, admitted criminals saying, no, but we don't kill people like that, when we have seen historically that they do kill people and commit these atrocities, it's very
a few things about the video. So I mean, first it's just this surrealness of Mexico.
Totally.
Now these propaganda videos of cartels also have a history.
Yeah.
And you go back, initially the cartels just drawing stuff on blankets and stuff.
But now we have social media, widespread.
But now they've got into quite, more sophisticated productions.
Yeah.
So like Cartel del Noreste, who have stuff where they made like CDN productions.
Literally.
And actually thinking about making press statements. Mm-hmm. Now at the same time, when it came out, there was a lot of suspicion by people in Mexico that this wasn't really them, that it was some kind of government op, like these could have been soldiers. One of the things about the tone was they were saying almost like, and it was, how come these searchers, these Buscadores, were going into a crime scene and almost like being making a kind of pro-government statement.
Totally.
And criticizing, extra government kind of vigilante activity of searching for bodies. And so it kind of fit in at the same time where you had the government, elements of the government criticizing the searchers, criticizing the find. You have the cartel doing it. I think I still find it hard to believe, and sometimes, being a foreigner coming to Mexico took me a lot of years to really understand the cynicism of certain government people in Mexico, mm-hmm. and the level of corruption. But still, I kind of find it hard to think that Mexican soldiers would really put on these, balaclavas and pretend to be a cartel and sit there making the video. It's quite a big step. It's not just the same as just taking money from somebody. You've got to actually sit there and make a video.
And write a script.
And everything.
I certainly believe it was CJ&G.
Yeah, so I think that the other thing is, another cartel or whatever. But let's say I think it probably was the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Probably is their video. One thing, so some of the wording, they say, we weren't in this area until 2012.
Yeah.
If you take that little phrase up. Now, but they don't say it wasn't our camp. They say we weren't there in 2012. Like that, you know, maybe it wasn't really established in 2012. It was established in 2015 or 2017 or something. But they kind of like say, well, there's kind of facts wrong about this. Maybe, I mean, it's so hard to know. There's been so many testimonies that have been put out there through media or through the searchers that I think, even though a lot of the testimonies are likely right, some of them are probably not.
I think some of the testimonies too, that we didn't mention this, it's not just from people who were there, but also victims' family members who identified their family members through the shoes and the bags that were there in the pictures, which that's really striking. Like that one woman who said that her husband was kidnapped outside of a department store while they were with their son, and he was kidnapped in broad daylight, and she saw his work boots and his clothes in the pictures. Or that young girl who told her mother, I'm going to go pick peaches and I think strawberries. And she saw, because she was wearing the sister's white sneakers, and brought her one and only duffel bag. And they found those in the pictures. And those kinds of testimonies I find are quite hard to dispute.
I think actually, from an evidence point of view, they're certainly very, very, very relevant. So you have people, they're like watching this on TV and they're saying, oh my God, that's like, you know, I've been searching for my son for like 5 years and that's his T-shirt. Now, you know, that's his jacket. Now, at the same time, you've also got to, you know, the jackets can look similar.
Of course.
Shoes can look similar.
You're going to want to find
massively traumatized victims who have been searching for years.
And have had no justice.
Yeah, you know, you need things like DNA evidence.
Totally.
So you need now. So what you need with this, I mean, you know, so I mean, last words on the video. I mean, it's, yeah, it probably is a real Jalisco Cartel video. The tone of it is just shows how crazy the Mexican situation is.
Totally.
They kind of try to present themselves as a kind of almost like a legitimate authority in these areas. It was almost like Viva Mexico, like at the end, and like, you know, we're fighting for Mexico kind of stuff, and like.
But in a way, they certainly are a legitimate authority.
Well, they're certainly a de facto authority.
Yes.
And you know, this gets into a parallel government you get in Mexico, you've had for some time. And you see these in things like going back to Ciudad Juarez in 2012, when they murdered a photographer on his lunch break. And the newspaper wrote a letter to addressing the cartels, saying, you are the de facto authority in the city. What do you want from us? What do you want our journalists to do? You know, you're going to kill our photographer on his lunch break? You know, what do you want us to do? Not take photographs of dead bodies? You tell us. They said it's a provocative way to kind of imply the government, you know, you're not protecting us. Obviously, the government doesn't like the idea of, you know, of you're the legitimate authority, you know, not us. But yeah, kind of a crazy video. I think obviously we're going to take their denial with a massive pinch of salt.
I agree.
I mean, the Jalisco Cartel, we know,
is violent historically.
There's a bunch of other mass graves where the bodies have been identified, where like 100 plus bodies are being identified around the place.
And we know that there are a significant number of violent recruitment camps throughout Jalisco that look just like this.
And what's really chilling, and you really have to see in this situation of this cartel was in Mexico, were the heroes of these mothers searching, because that video is basically a threat to those mothers.
To them, and they do this with no protection.
Yeah,
they are not protected by the government. They don't have security. It is literally desperate family members looking for their missing loved ones. I mean. It takes a huge level of courage to go and do this in the first place, and then for CJ&G to literally put out a video and be like, "You guys are the enemy."
Yeah, I mean, so absolute it's a kind of a threat. I mean, not even a really veiled threat, basically a threat to the mothers. We take it with a pinch of salt. So what you need in this camp and in all of this stuff is a proper federal investigation, analysing all the evidence, analysing these testimonies, and really getting a proper report. Are we going to get that?
I don't think so. And I think that this is something that I could see a lot of people, especially like our American audience, saying, well, this is exactly the type of thing where the FBI should go in and conduct this full-on investigation with forensics, with behavioral analysts, to talk to the people who claim to have been victims here, people saying that they identified family members' belongings there, and then going in and literally digging up the dirt and going through each and every piece of clothing and going into those ovens and doing a thorough investigation, because unfortunately, I just don't see that happening from the Mexican government.
Well, we saw a terrible thing happen in that there was. So first, we've had like this. This always happens in these cases where you've had, the chain of evidence has already been messed up completely.
Yep.
Supposedly the state government had secured the property on September 20th. And then these mothers go in there, and they're not government officials, but then again,
and they're doing it the best way they know possible.
Yeah.
They're not going in fully suited up, knowing to preserve evidence.
Yeah, and I mean they're digging away, and then you've got the state government going back in there, and then saying, then they let them. Then the federal government's supposed to be taking over. No, in my view, as soon as the news come out, the federal government should have sent the military, secured the place,
shut it down,
and shut it down.
Don't contaminate the scene.
Don't contaminate the scene, and send the best people there. The federal government with other observers, even international observers, to look at this something. They didn't do that. They still allowed the state government to keep on, messing up the scene. And then they had this day of letting the press and the mothers go back in there. Now, supposedly this is showing like an openness, but it was an absolute mess where you saw these scenes of mothers going in there and saying, God, all of this stuff we saw has now been changed. They've like plastered over the ovens, and they've taken away all the possessions. And then mothers like rolling on the ground, crying and shouting. Then a bunch of media doing like live stand-ups and stamping all over the evidence and kind of making up whatever, or trying to get some story they could. And this is the scene now. At this point, I think it's likely going to be like many of these big cases in Mexico, like the Ayotzinapa case. Mm-hmm. So 43 students who disappeared in September 2014, last seen in the hands of local police officers arresting them, disappeared off the face of the earth, and then basically completely messed up case, found some body fragments, identified through DNA, accused of mass bonfire of burning, all these kind of things, but no one ever being happy and it not being solved. I think this is going the same way.
I agree.
I think you've already got the evidence chain has already been completely messed up. I think whatever they find, if the government now comes up and says we can't find bodies here, we can't find ovens, the families now is going to say, well, you've messed it up. You've messed up the chain of evidence. You deliberately hid it. Did the federal government deliberately let the families and press go on to mess up the crime scene?
That's a great question, and I think that goes back to the fact that the National Guard was there in September, and nobody heard anything about the clothes, about the personal belongings, about the ovens, and it was all just left there. I mean, do you really think that the National Guard went in there and didn't see all of that, if the Buscadores did? And then if they did see all of that, did that not raise suspicion? And if it did raise suspicion, why was everything just left there and the place was abandoned? You know what?
Actually, sometimes incompetence is above conspiracy. And I actually could see a situation where a few soldiers I'm trying to remember if it was herd shooting or identified people with guns, or had a source of people with guns were roaming around.
I think it was someone had called in and said that there was people with guns and they had heard. It was like a mixture.
Her guns, or even this stuff. Is the evidence ever going to be really clear? But anyway, some soldiers go in there, arrest some people, find a body, and then leave and don't bother searching the ranch properly. And like it's so crazy. It's a big ranch. It's about 1,000 square meters. But like it's so crazy. And obviously, if in like Canada, US, UK, they find a ranch with a body on it and some people kidnapped, you do like a proper like search of it then.
So this actually just recently happened in Canada, where they found mass unmarked graves of Indigenous children at the previous residential schools all across Canada. Well, after the first one was found, and it was through activist groups for Indigenous groups to go and look over because so many kids had gone missing. After this, mass investigations were conducted at every previous residential school site across Canada. Mass graves were found everywhere, but these sites were locked down. There was a lot of rhetoric of whether or not to exhume the bodies and to conduct investigations, but it was a total lockdown. Here, it's like, you have fucking people going in, rolling on the ground, crying. Imagine, like, as journalists, going in and doing a live hit at an open investigation scene, walking around and just showing the whole crime scene.
Yeah, I mean, but I've seen this again and again in Mexico. Just on the Canadian thing, it's a bit of a tangent, but like I understand there's quite a lot of controversy and back and forth about the residential school thing. But in Mexico, I've been to so many crime scenes, scenes of massacres. I went to the scene of 2 massacres in Sinaloa, in a village called El Pozo, and it was still covered in bullets. The bullets were still found, like, we went around, we still found like 100 bullets on the ground.
That were not retrieved or
anything. Were not retrieved.
I know.
So you hadn't had basic crime scene collection.
That was when I was in Culiacan in the fall.
Yeah.
During this whole infighting of the factions, every morning I would get called to a scene where there was a body or bodies, and we would get there and people were just like kind of, the body was haphazardly covered with a tarp. There's already flies everywhere. The sun is like beaming down on this body. How are you going to collect evidence? It's like already starting to rot, for a lack of a better way of describing that. And then the blocked off section is really just like a few meters of around this body. Yeah, there's still bullets everywhere. The blood splatter goes way beyond where it's blocked off. People are walking their kids to school and walking over like the blood spatter and the bullets. What kind of crime scene investigation is that?
So I don't think that we're ever going to get a very satisfactory conclusion of the investigations in this one. We'll get something, but and it'd be interesting to see what they find. I don't think we're ever going to get that. What I do think we're getting, so you see in Mexico, in reaction to this last 2 decades of violence, these various moments where there's public reactions.
Yes.
Now these include, go back to 2004, there was a public reaction to kidnapping. 2008 again, when I think that was after the son of the owner of Marti Sports chain was kidnapped and murdered. Big demonstrations. 2011 with Javier Cecilia, whose son was murdered, and this was a poet in Cuernavaca, and he started creating a very big movement of people going around plazas, coming out, talking about victims. 2014 with the Ayotzinapa students. 2013 to 14 with the autodefensa movement, with the rise of people actually rising up with guns against this. And this is again another of these moments right now. We'll see how big it gets. I went to the demonstration in the Zócalo, and it wasn't that big. It was very emotional,
for sure.
Emotionally charged. The images were very powerful. Later, then they started to be fighting with police.
Yeah.
I think it's suspicious about the fighting with police. I think when I was there, it was very peaceful but intense.
And I had imagined that it was going to be peaceful because it was almost like people in mourning, like it was like a vigil.
Yeah.
More than a protest.
And then there's suddenly there's videos of a bunch of guys you know,
Encapuchados.
encapuchados guys in what Americans call ski masks.
Yeah.
In the UK, they say balaclavas, going in there and
Starting
a
shit.
fight. Now, were they sent in as agitators from the government? That kind of thing I can't believe the government doing. Or somebody else who wanted to kind of kick some stuff up, who doesn't like the government, you know, any kind of group, or just very passionate, militant left-wing groups who do this kind of stuff. I don't know. But you know, we'll see how far. But one thing, you know, these cartel wars in Mexico, they've been going on 2 decades now. Traumatic. At some point, I feel this has to end. And part of that ending, you'd hope, is people having, you know, rising in consciousness about this and saying we can't allow this kind of violence, this kind of kidnapping, this kind of stuff to happen.
A harder stance, and from people in authority.
Yeah,
and I think, you know, we're focusing on, you know, is there going to be some kind of justice? Are we going to identify the people that were there, the victims? But at the same time, are we ever going to identify who was directly responsible for this place? Because there were guys that were there actively running this camp. There are lists of names of the commanders and who was in each commander's group. You know, there's notebooks that were found at this camp. And how is it really that hard to find the plaza boss or the guys that were running this, like directly? You know, we don't even have to go right up the ladder right now. Let's focus on who was A, B, C, and D, the guys that were there, that were forcing the people to fight, that were throwing them to the pigs, that were bringing the girls to get raped. Who were the guys that were directly in charge?
And I think the problem with this in Mexico is that it is kind of beyond the justice system to deal with this. And it is, I would argue, a form of armed conflict that's happening in Mexico. These are war crimes, basically. And it's not just the kind of idea that like a regular court cases can be done. And if you've got other cases, so the mass murders in Allende, which was allegedly by members of the Zetas, and they weren't even being charged with these mass murders, even though people were accusing them of this. Now those 2 guys, the 2 leaders of the Zetas, Z40, Z42, have since been
extradited.
Not
extradited.
Expelled to the US in an extrajudicial process, which is questionable. But under this stuff and this idea of designating them as terrorists, and they could face a death penalty in the US. Now, this is happening among this, and will this align together to somehow bring an end to this tragedy?
No.
Or will it only inflame it more? I don't know. But it's big, crazy things happening.
And very tragic.
Absolutely. So, okay, with that very sad note, I'm going to do the outro of this.
Because there's no conclusion.
No conclusion.
Unfortunately, we have to talk about this shit and feel sad and feel frustration or whatever it is. And, you know, we try to do our best and go in and tell the story to the most thorough extent possible. But people will always ask, so what needs to be done?
We'll have to talk about more of that next time. But this is what we know about this case of the Jalisco extermination camp.